So, welcome to another edition of Digging Deeper. My name is Bradley Martin, and I'm excited to once again be with you. Thank you for joining us for another week. We are on week 2 of a new study on the book of Exodus. Last week, I introduced the book of Exodus, and I told you that there was a transition going on between Joseph and his family. Remember that this all started in Genesis 13 through 15 with the promise that God gave to Abraham, his covenant that Abraham, even though you're old and you're past the point of childbearing, you and your wife both, I'm going to produce a great nation within you, and that nation is going to be more than the stars in the sky that you can count. Of course, Abraham, being the age that he was like, God, this is a great idea, but I don't see how this is going to happen. Well, God is a bigger God than we are, and God can do great things. And of course, at the age of 90, Abraham had a son. His name was Isaac. Isaac grew up, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And out of those two sons, great things happened, and a great nation happened, especially out of the side of Jacob. Jacob was the younger, and even though Esau should have been the son of the promise, Jacob tricked his dad into the blessing. And there's debate, there's argument on there whether not whether, but you can see that God had his hand on Jacob the whole time. Jacob fled because he was afraid of his brother, ended up in the land of his uncle Laban, where he met what he thought was going to be his future wife, Rachel. Rachel was the younger sister of her sister Leah. So he ended up marrying both of those, and out of those two marriages, he produced 12 sons. And last week, as we started last week, I read the first of Exodus, to where you had all these sons of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Those sons were dying off, including Jacob. Jacob was dead. Joseph was dead. Joseph had this, through a series of events, had this relationship with the Pharaoh of Egypt. Egypt was the great power at the time. Through time and through death, all those people died, including the Pharaoh that was taking care of Joseph and his family. So eventually there arose another Pharaoh in Egypt that did not know Joseph and his family, so there was no relationship with them. This king recognized that the family of Israel was becoming a great nation, and so what was going on here? He was trying to subdue the growth of this family, because he recognized that this family was becoming a great nation, and that they would soon be able to become allies with their enemies and rise up against them and bring harm to their nation. So he did some terrible things. He enslaved them. He put pressure on them to where they didn't even think that they could rise up against and revolt against the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. And so there's great slavery going on. It's just not a good situation. And I told you last week that there's a long time that this is going on. We know through the prophecy, and we know through the Bible, that Israel's family, Israel the nation, was in Egypt for 400 years. We also know that, and we're going to be introduced here in chapter 2 of Exodus to the deliverer, which is Moses. Moses is probably, arguably, the most recognized or the most strong character person in the Old Testament. There are a few that are big names in the Old Testament. Moses is always mentioned as one of those. We see this move from Abraham and his family to be, the God of, you hear the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, and you hear that throughout the Old Testament, really. But you're going to be introduced to Moses here. And we know that Moses' life was around 120 years. If you look in Acts, I think it's chapter 7, where Stephen is on trial before they stone him, and he's given this great dissertation, this great recitation, basically on the whole Bible. We know that basically Moses' life was divided into 40 years. And so if you do the math really quickly, what chapter 2 is going to start with the birth of Moses, so that's at least 40 years there. There's 40 more years before they leave Egypt, and then there's 40 years of wandering, which will come later on in the book of Exodus. And so we're talking about at least 80 years of the 400 years that the people were enslaved in Egypt. So we're talking around 320-ish years up to this point. And so there's many generations that have gone through. Many people have come and gone. Of course, the entire original clan of the 12 sons of Jacob are now gone, including Joseph. Most likely, most of his sons and grandsons, and probably even great-grandsons, are dead. They have passed on. They have lived their life. And so you can see here that and we know that the farther you get away from the story, it kind of waters down a little bit. You kind of lose a lot of what's going on firsthand, of course. We know that we are living in an oral society here, to where everything is passed down from generation to generation. We'll see that more and more as we move through Exodus, and as you look through the rest of the books of Moses. You see that God instructs the people of Israel to make sure you tell your family all this that's going on, because evidently, if not truly, there's been a lot lost here in this time frame. The people have forgotten the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They've forgotten the promise. They've forgotten what God has promised, and also where they're coming from. It's interesting to me to see that when you look back into Genesis 15 and you see how God provided Abraham with his covenant. He told him that there's going to be 400 years of slavery. There's going to be 400 years where these people are away in another land, but I'm going to bring them back. So while Moses, of course, Moses is the author of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So Moses had to have been told all these stories, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the nation got all these things from their parents and their grandparents. So we have to make sure that we are continuing to pass down the promises of God. That's why it's important when, it's good that we live in a society that's not just oral. We're in a culture that things are written down. We're actually now in a culture where things are videoed. So you can look back and see pictures and remember those things, and you can go back and you can watch and listen to all those things. But it's also important to pass those things down. So when you go through situations in life, those are those markers. We see those markers throughout. There's times in the Exodus where the people are crossing the Jordan River. He has the people to put those stones into the water, and those are for remembering. Those are for memorial times. And so basically that's where we're going. That's an introduction to chapter 2. I'm going to read chapter 2, there is again this movement to now the main character of the story, um, other than of course God, who is the central character, but things are narrowing down back to Moses. We're introduced to Moses as a young baby. Remember too that as we ended chapter 1, there is the king, the Pharaoh, has decided one of the ways he's going to subdue the nation of Israel is he's going to take all the male babies and he's going to throw them into the Nile River and have them killed. So, what I think, in my perception of this, is that he's trying to unpurify the nation to where he's trying to do away eventually with all of those young men, all those babies who potentially, of course, could procreate with Israelite women and continue this nation. He's trying to muddy up the the nation to where it's not the nation of Israel anymore. It's just like everybody else. You see that throughout the Old Testament, where people went outside of Israel's family and um, had relations with women from other nations, and it not only muddied up the genetic pool, but it also muddied up the theological um, view that you have, because when they went out to other nations and um, they brought in the belief system and the gods of other cultures, of other nations. So that is where we're at here in chapter 2. The Pharaoh has made this rule where we're going to do away with all of um, the the male babies, so that he can take care of those things. And now we have this new baby that's being born named Moses. And so we're introduced with him here in verse 1. So let me read this. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, he hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with a bitumen pitch. She put the child in it and placed it amongst the reeds up by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While she saw the young woman beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent the servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, I will draw him out of the water. So we have this interesting story of a young boy who is born out of a marriage between the Levite clan. The Levites would eventually become the priest of Israel. And so you have all of these sons of Israel. One's name was Levite. And so we know that from this point on, that God would separate or sanctify the Levite portion of Israel, make them into the priests of the nation. So you have Moses being born out of that. So Moses was at least the third child of this family. We know that Aaron was his brother, and we're introduced here to Miriam. Miriam, we're not told her age, but obviously she was at least of age enough that she could do the things that she did. And a couple of the things that she did was when Moses' mother took him and placed him into the river, where she was just praying and hoping that something good would come for him. Moses' sister Miriam was old enough and was aware enough that she could watch and see exactly what happened to him. What probably happened was either she was very interested in this or she was instructed by her mother. It doesn't really matter which of those. We just know that she did. And we also know that she was old enough to communicate with the Pharaoh's daughter. Now, we don't live in a culture to where there is a king or a queen or a family that's in charge, but we don't want to slip past the fact here that Moses' family was enslaved by Egypt. So it would have been very um, uncouth, very not acceptable for, first of all, for the Pharaoh's daughter to go against the wishes of her father, the king. She could have been punished for that. But it would have been also unusual and strange for her to have a conversation with a Hebrew girl. So when she saw Moses in this basket in the Nile, um, the Bible says that she had pity on him, so much so that she didn't want anything to happen to him. So she recognized the fact that he was one of the people enslaved. Obviously, she knew what her father's wishes and commands were, that these people were supposed to be, they were supposed to be killed. But she had pity on him, so much so that she had Miriam, who was there kind of just quote unquote by chance, kind of checking things out, to go and find someone that could nurse and take care of Moses. Again, you can say it just happened to happen. I think God planned this, and God had his hand all over this. And you see it kind of interesting, so that not only was Moses' mother and family not punished for going against the wishes of the king, they were actually paid for the mother to take care of them. Now, we don't know if Moses' mother knew, or if the Pharaoh's daughter knew that this child belonged to Moses. It doesn't make sense to me to say that, hey, she knew that. It would have been more, hey, run go get me a woman that can take care of this child. Well, of course, Miriam, being the daughter and being the sister, said, "Oh, now's my chance. I'm going to get mom to take care of this." So she went and got her mother, who is Moses' mother, to take care of them. We see this clash even now. We see this separation, this battle. The battle lines are being drawn here between freedom and slavery. The freedom, or the people who are in charge, which is Egypt, have Israel enslaved, as well as other groups, I'm sure, because Egypt was the powerhouse at the time. There are no other groups mentioned here in the text, but that doesn't mean that there were not other groups that were enslaved by Egypt. I mentioned to you last week that this all happened because of the famine. This all happened because the only place that grain could be purchased, the only grain that could be found in those 7 years of famine, were in Egypt. So when everybody was hungry, when everybody was desperate, they gave everything that they had to Egypt in order to get food. That was the plan of Joseph, ironically. There are several clashes between slavery and freedom throughout the Old Testament, and even into the New Testament. Israel, as you move throughout the Old Testament, God gave them over to the Assyrians and to the Babylonians. You always see here, the funny thing is, the ironic thing is, is that even though people are brought through slavery, the people of God are brought through slavery, there's always an end to it. And there's always an end to where the group that is in charge is actually punished or is actually going through more at the end than anything that the nation or that they put the nation of Israel through. The Babylonians were eventually taken over by the Greeks, which were eventually taken over by the Romans. And we know historically that eventually the Roman Empire fell. And we live in a free society right now. We thank God we live in a free society. I'm recording this on the day after the 4th of July, where we celebrate our freedom. But in the 249, we're about to celebrate 250 years of freedom for our country. We have forgotten how it feels to live under a group. So there's always this clash between free and slavery, and you have this through out the Old Testament. You have this really throughout the Bible. The entirety of the New Testament was written under the occupation of Rome. Rome was the power in the New Testament. So everything that you have written inside the context of the Bible is written under slavery. And I think it's very important to know. You see this juxtaposed a lot with the Apostle Paul in his writings. He puts those two, freedom and slavery, by each other. And really, we're all under the bondage of slavery until we, of course, are introduced and accept the free gift of grace that Jesus has brought to us. So that whole theme is throughout the Bible. And you see this here where you have this evil group, the Egyptians, they have bondage over, or have put the nation of Israel in bondage. Now, there's a lot of significance that point toward Jesus, especially with Moses. I think I mentioned this last episode where I'm not saying that Moses is Jesus. Jesus was the Son of God, is the Son of God. Jesus was the only perfect man, person, human being that ever walked on the earth. Moses sinned. So there is a difference between Moses and Jesus. But there's a lot of similarities in how Moses is to the nation of Israel as Jesus is to us. Now, Moses was the intercessor. Moses was the go-between between God and the people of Israel. Moses was the person that could go up on the mountain, which we'll look at in the coming chapters, to where he could speak on behalf of Israel. Moses was Moses was held in high esteem to Israel up until and throughout Jesus. You had, if you go back and look at the Gospels, you see that, especially with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, when they are bringing this case against Jesus, they always go back to, we are disciples of Moses. We are followers of Moses. And who do you think you are? And of course, Jesus draws the line in separation there because he is the Son of God. He is God. He is the human form of God himself. But there is a lot of foreshadowing that's pointing toward Jesus. I mentioned last week, and just let me remind you that this same death sentence that that the Pharaoh pronounced on the nation of Israel with their babies being born, or with their babies being killed, is the same thing that happened when Herod found out about Jesus being born. When the wise men didn't come back and tell him everything that he wanted to know about Herod, Herod said, "Well, you know what? I'll just take care of all of the baby boys, and I'll just destroy them." So we have that same significance. There are Moses' parents protected him by hiding him Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, ironically fled and went to Egypt until it was time until the time of Herod was gone, until Herod died or was killed. Actually, so there is a lot of Jesus that you see in the life of Moses. Remember that you have to look at this. This is, and I hesitate to say story, because when we think of story, we think of something that's made up. But this is a true. If you want to think of it as nonfiction, it's real. This whole thing from cover to cover, from Genesis to the Book of Revelation, is this true and real love story that God provided us, that He has done for us, and it goes continually. Sometimes we do it a disservice by cherry picking certain books or certain passages. I just now I know you say, well, we're studying the book of Exodus right now, so I've picked that book out. Okay, I know that people, preachers preach on certain passages and certain things, and I get that, but you've got to put the entire thing in context. So that's what I always try to do, even when we go thematically, and we do that both. That's how our pastor preaches and teaches as well, contextually in the setting that is written, both that and how contextually and how it practically um, meets us. So just wanted to show. Now you have this conflict again, and I have said this as well, that the book of Exodus is a book of conflict, and there's multiple conflicts that happen a lot. So the Moses' initial conflict was that his life was in danger, him being a baby, and he had no say so in that. There was nothing, you can't do anything as a baby that would protect yourself. You are under the protection of someone else, and so the people that were closest to the person that was trying to destroy all the babies was actually the savior of Moses. And so you think, okay, everything's going to go well now with Moses, because not only was he taken out of slavery, but he was also adopted by the royal family. So he now has become a child of the royal family. He's become a son to the Pharaoh's daughter. As I finish there in verse number 10, it says that when the child grew, he's talking about Moses here, Pharaoh's daughter was brought to Moses, and Moses became her son. She named him Moses because he drew him. I drew him out of the water. So that's the name of Moses. So now you have this next conflict here with Moses, and it says in verse 11, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. I want to stop there and just make sure we understand that while Moses was brought up into the royal family, he obviously knew and remembered where he came from. It wasn't as if he was proselytized or subdued into thinking that he was always an Egyptian. He knew something was different. He knew the story where he came from. It says here in verse 11 that he saw the burden of his people, and the ironic thing here is that Moses. Remember, Moses is the author of this book, so this is a first-hand account, even though it doesn't. It's not written in first person. It is written from the perspective of Moses. So he is the person that is writing this. So everything factually is going to check out because he knows exactly what he's going through. So Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. It doesn't say that the Egyptian was part of the royal family. To me, the lack of that being said means that it's a common Egyptian. So you've read historically when you have a people group that is being enslaved by another group, that people group who has enslaved the other group feels somewhat in authority over them, even though they have no authority. This is a monarch to where there is one person in charge. There is one single authority, and in this case, it is the Pharaoh. So you would not have had the ability or the legality to do as this Egyptian did, which says he was beating a Hebrew. So Moses sees this, verse 12. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and held him and hid him into the sand. So we can see here that Moses recognizes his people. He knows his people, and he feels some sort of burden for them because an Egyptian is beating them. So he looks around and he sees nobody, so he thinks everything is scot-free and clear. He's able to do what he thinks he needs to do. And he struck him down. He killed him. He killed this Egyptian. He thinks no one's watching. So this is his initial thought, to where he thinks he is doing what he thinks he needs to be done, and that is to help his people. But what he's doing here is he's trying to fulfill his calling by doing something that he can do, or something that he has in mind of the way he wants to do that. And that's often, as the children of God, how we think when God calls you to do something, we often will look and say, well, this is the way I'm going to do it. This is the way that makes sense. When God has something 180 degrees in the other direction. There's going to be 40 more years before Moses comes back. God's timing is perfect. Paul writes in, I think it's 1 Corinthians, at just the right time Christ came. God could have sent Christ. God could have come in the form of Christ at any point in time throughout this entire process. He could have whisked his people away. God is powerful. We know that God is powerful enough to do anything that he wants because he's God. But God did not have it in the purpose of Moses to do this right now. And when we do something that is not in the will of God, even though it may seem like it's the right thing to do, there's this conflict that we have with our spirit. And this is exactly what happened with Moses here. It says here, when he, in verse 13, when he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? He said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses is hanging out with his people. Obviously, he knows he's a part of this people. And he thought what he did was correct. He thought by striking down the person that was bringing harm to a fellow Hebrew, that he was doing right. But what has happened, the next day, he comes and he sees now not an Egyptian and a Hebrew having this altercation, but he sees two brothers, two Hebrews that are having this argument together. And obviously one is in the wrong, because it says here that Moses speaks to the one that's in the wrong. And he says, why are you doing this? You guys are brothers. You guys should not be having this altercation. We have this group that we're trying to fight against, but we can't fight against them if we're fighting with each other. Well, Moses doesn't get the response that he would imagine. The guy says, hey, are you, who's made you a prince and a judge over us? You're just to us, you're nothing. You are, while it may seem that he was something, being the Prince of Egypt, one of my favorite movies, one of the original animated movies that I really and truly love to watch. He was a prince of the Egyptian king, but to the Hebrews that meant nothing. He was, his position and his power to them meant nothing, and they confronted him by saying, "Hey, are you going to do the same thing to us as you did to that Egyptian yesterday when you killed him?" Well, Moses was like, "I thought nobody saw that. I thought I hid that. I put him in the sand, and I thought he was that was something that was done, and I wouldn't have to worry about it." And it says that Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So this big secret that Moses was carrying um, was now an open. And I think it's very evident that Pharaoh didn't know where Moses came from. And I'll tell you why that I come to this conclusion. I think there's always been, throughout this whole entire process, there was a conflict that Pharaoh's daughter, who became the mother of Moses, didn't tell the Pharaoh that she'd done this. And I think that even because of the reaction of Pharaoh, and I think that's the reason why that we can conclude that once Pharaoh knew that this was going on, that he had killed an Egyptian, that he was hanging out with the Hebrews, that from that point on, the Pharaoh tried to kill him. So all those 40 years that Moses spent as a prince, as the son of, which would have been the grandson of the Pharaoh, those things were now open, that he was not a pure Egyptian, that he was actually one of the people enslaved. So, in order to get away from his death, he fled to the land of Midian, and he ended up by a well. Now, I did a lot of looking and seeing, was there any significance of that? And there are a lot of people that believe, a lot of scholars that believe that the significance of that well is the same where Jacob, it doesn't say that it's the same place where Jacob sat down by a well. John chapter 4, I believe, Jesus met the woman by Jacob's well. But I don't know if those were the same wells, but probably not. But we can correlate the significance of that was by a well. That was where Jacob met God, where he was replenished. And so you have this correlation now back to the fathers, back to Jacob, back to God's promise from Abraham through Isaac and now through Jacob and his family. There's a significance there of I've called you, and I'm remembering my promises that I have done for the people of Israel even years before. Verse 16 says, "Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to him to draw water and fill the troughs to water the father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, 'How is that you have come home so soon today?' They said, 'An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock.' He said to his daughters, 'Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread.' And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah, and she gave birth to a son, and called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land.' During those many days the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue for slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew." Now, as we end chapter 2, we have here very specifically spelled out that Moses has fled from Egypt. He has fled as far away um, from Egypt, from his aggressor, that he can. Um, he is introduced to Ruel, otherwise called Jethro, in the remaining part of the book. Those two people are the same, just a different name. Ruel or or Jethro gives Moses one of his daughters, Zipporah, to be his wife. They have a son, and now we see that he is content. He said, you know what? I had all of this um, that I had every power in the world, and there was always a angst and anxiety. There was something that was not sitting correctly while he was in Egypt, and he didn't really ever understand that until later. But he knew that this place where he was a good place. It was far away from his ability or his threat of being killed. Um, and he had everything he ever wanted. He's on the backside of a desert. He's able to be a shepherd. He's able to raise a family, and he's just able to be content there. So he has decided he's going to spend the rest of his life on the backside of a mountain here in the desert and just live it out, and I'm going to be okay. Um, we know that that's not what God had intended, and we'll see starting in chapter 3 how God interrupts that contentment that Moses thought, hey, I'm going to live out my life here. We also have the fact that the Pharaoh that put Egypt through all of this, that person died. And so his son is going to become in power. And if you do the math on that, it's either his son or now his grandson, depending upon who that. So it's either Moses' adopted brother or Moses' adopted uncle. Regardless, is somebody that would know who Moses is. And we're going to see now, if you watch The Prince of Egypt, they portrayed it as his brother. Um, could have been. Doesn't really historically matter here. We just know that that's in that line of family. Um, we know that there's going. We get, if you're just reading this for the first time, just as you're reading a book, you're seeing this potential for conflict that's going to happen. That you're being set up for. But we're also reminded of God's promises here, of God's covenant with his people, that while everything that was going on was still going on, the people were still enslaved. Even though the people that put them in slavery had now died, they're still in slavery. But we are told that God remembered. God heard their groaning. God heard their cry, and God remembered it, and He knew. And we know that God is not a God that can lie or will change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, as the writer to the book of Hebrews said that. So that's the end of chapter 2. We have Moses in the land of Midian who is content to live out his days. I can tell you, spoiler alert, God's about to interrupt that. God's about to say, you know what, I'm not done with you yet. I have created you and called you for this purpose, and I'm going to absolutely shake the ground you're standing on here very momentarily, so that's your whole perspective that's going to change. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is going to start here, and these are going to be really this is the chapter 2 and a little bit of chapter 3. You can see is that middle 40 of Moses' life where he's content, but the next 40 is about to happen when he's called to lead his people out. Let me pray for us. I appreciate you hanging on, and we'll see you next time. God, thank you for this day, all you've done for us. Thank you for this love story that you have given us and the ability to study and learn a little bit more of that. We thank you for what you've done for us, and we give you all the honor and the glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.